Hello all, and many thanks for attending the Digital Futures of Literature, which is part of King's Festival of Artificial Intelligence 2025. I'm Professor Kate Devlin. I'm going to be the panel chair this evening. This is the third year of the festival, brought to you by King's Institute for Artificial Intelligence, with free events for both King's and for external audiences to showcase all of the AI expertise that we have across the college. And this year there are over 40 separate events, 45 I think, that are happening over 5 days between the 20th to the 24th of May. If you'd like to find out more about those events or about the King's Institute for AI, join the mailing list or find out about other events in the festival or in general, go ahead to kcl.ac.uk/AI or follow the King's Institute on social media. So we have a little bit of housekeeping just to start off. Please do switch your mobile phones to silent. That includes you on the panel. That includes me as well, just checking. Okay. To my knowledge, there are no fire alarms scheduled. So if a fire alarm sounds, follow a very hasty retreat from the panel out the doors. Any door you find is good. There's going to be an opportunity to put questions to our panelists this evening, and you'll be able to do this anonymously via Slido if you feel that you need to do that. We will also have microphones and people will bring you a mic if you want to ask those questions in person. But you can also post your questions online and we'll be able to see those. And you can also upvote other people's questions if there's something you really want to hear about. I'll put the code up in just a moment. So a little bit about the context of this evening. This evening's panel is brought to you by King's Digital Futures Institute, the DFI. And the DFI launched back in April 2023, and I took over as the chair director in January 2025. So I've had quite an intense 4 months, four and a bit months, just getting into the swing of things. So you can think of the Digital Futures Institute as sort of a sibling to the King's Institute of AI. And both of us really aim to connect research and researchers across the college and to support educational initiatives in our themes. And we want to tackle those big questions about technology in the most holistic way possible. And the AI Institute focuses on AI, no surprises in the name. And Digital Futures looks really more broadly at the digital, but in how those digital aspects meet the human and what happens with people and technology. We were really keen to keep the original DFI idea of a series of public-facing events that put research into action and that lead conversations. And so to fit with the Institute's theme, which is living well with technology, we decided that each month we're going to explore the digital futures of a different topic. And we're starting that series this evening with the digital futures of literature. On the 23rd of June, we're going to be taking a closer look at the digital futures of diversity, and that's especially in light of current events in the US where DEI initiatives are being dismantled while we watch. That will be an in-person event in Bush House, but we will also be streaming that online. In July, we're going to look at the digital futures of security, looking at the ways in which technology both positively and negatively impacts the nation's defences, and that's going to be an online panel. But now, tonight's panel. Sarah, could you change the slide, please? Who needs technology when you have a human who can do this for you? It's great. So, AI permeates our everyday lives, and it's often without us even realising it, whether it's Google Maps or a recommendation on Netflix or setting a timer on Alexa. But back in November 2022, OpenAI upped the stakes significantly when they released ChatGPT for free public use. And since that time, the term AI is often used to refer specifically to generative AI. And the advent of these large language models, which is what ChatGPT is, has forced us to consider our own ideas around creativity and authorship and voice. Tech companies are promising to give us everything, but are delivering something that also takes from us. And sometimes that's quite literally in the case of things like copyright. So what value does a craft have if that craft can be mass produced? This is not the first time in history that question has been asked. And what fair compensation is there when an AI model that has been trained without consent or attribution on the words of writers who never intended to become part of the machine, how fair is that? But could AI be democratizing? Can it inspire? And so maybe these AI tools are giving voices to people who might never have picked up a pen otherwise, but whose ideas can transport us and delight us. They're finally being surfaced. And to discuss all of these things and more, we've got a crack team of experts here. So next to me is Dr. Clementine Collett. She is a BRAID research fellow at the Minderoo Centre for Technology and Democracy at the University of Cambridge, and is a principal investigator on the project Co-Designing Responsible Technology and Policy for the Impact of Generative AI on the Writing and Publishing of the Novel, in partnership with the Institute for the Future of Work. And Clemmy is also a novelist herself. In the middle, Professor Genevieve Lively, a professor of classics and the director of the Research Institute for Socio-Technical Cybersecurity at the University of Bristol. She's also a Turing Fellow. She's a classicist working on narrative and is the co-editor of the newly published Routledge Handbook of AI and Literature. And at the far end, Dr. Sarah Perry, a visiting research fellow in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at King's. She's a Booker Prize-nominated best-selling novelist, the author of The Essex Serpent and Enlightenment, amongst others, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Welcome, everyone. And Sarah, if I could ask you once again to change the slides. Thank you. So here we have, thank you very much, that was excellent work. Excellent. You will not be replaced by an AI anytime soon. Okay, so this is the Slido QR code, and if you scan that code, it will take you to the Slido app, or you can use the link there with the joining code. That allows you to ask questions, to upvote other people's questions, and decide what you want to hear from the panelists. And so we'll make sure there's plenty of time for discussion, because that's the joy of a panel. But first I'm going to start by asking you all something. So if you're able, could we have a show of hands for anyone who's ever, at any point, used generative AI? Okay, that's a lot, right? Okay. Can I have a show of hands for anyone who routinely uses it, like frequently uses it? Okay, it's fewer, but so most of you are familiar and have tried it out. And some people don't like admitting it either, by the way. I mean, including myself sometimes. So now I'm going to ask the panel members, do you use any AI tools in your work, generative or otherwise?
I do not use any generative AI. I do use spell check, but and a grammar check, which comes up on Word, but apart from that, no, not really. Nope.
No, and I disable spell check and grammar check.
Okay, we have a panel of purists here. I occasionally use generative AI. I use it occasionally for writing succinct synopsis of things that I've blathered on about for too long, but I don't tend to use it in my academic writing, mostly because I don't trust it. So, with this in mind, with our panel of purists, the Society of Authors and other writers' unions have made statements about the use of AI for writers and in publishing, and they've deliberately not called for an outright ban. And they say this isn't an us versus them problem, but that there are risks. And the Publishers Association published a report that highlights benefits to the industry in terms of things like productivity, but they also flag major concerns over getting copyright right. So Clemmy, let's start with you. Your BRAID fellowship is about developing policy and design recommendations surrounding generative AI and its impact on novel writing and publishing. Can you tell us more about what your work involves?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. So as Kate said at the beginning, I'm a BRAID UK fellow at the University of Cambridge, and I work on the impact of generative AI systems on novelists and publishers. And my work really falls into kind of three categories. The first is I look at copyright and licensing, which I'll come on to in a minute. The second is I look at if and how writers and publishers are using AI systems in their creative practice. And the third is that I look at how it's impacting their livelihoods and kind of specifically their income. And it's such an interesting topic because I think a bit of a kind of backdrop is that when a lot of the work was going on a few years ago around how AI was going to impact labour, some of which I was doing myself in various reports, I think we suspected that the creative industries would be one of the last industries to be affected by changes in AI. And actually what we're seeing is that it's kind of one of the first. And so, yeah, my work really, I work across stakeholders, which is fascinating. So I work with people in government, lawyers, technologists on the one side, and then on the other side, I work with creatives like novelists, publishers, and literary agents. And I do this through focus groups. So I've been running focus groups up and down the country. I have a survey which has been completed by almost 400 novelists on all of those various topics. And I also do interviews and in-depth case studies. And the reason that I do that is to learn about what all of those different stakeholders think on these topics, but also really and crucially to center the voice of creatives in this discussion and to create these channels where I can feed that back to people who are in the seats of power. It's been really interesting and a lot of stuff to unpack, which hopefully we'll do throughout the discussion. But some kind of high-level things that I've found to be quite interesting are that there are kind of very big differences in perception of opportunity between publishing and writing and agenting. Generally speaking, a lot more opportunity to be found in publishing and agenting than people perceive there to be in writing. Writers are being affected, particularly ghostwriters, I think, is quite an interesting one, where ghostwriters kind of used to be writing these full manuscripts for people. Now they're finding that it's sort of being done by AI a lot more. So yeah, that's a kind of broad brushstroke over what I do. Just to go back to the copyright and licensing briefly, what I've been doing over the last few months has been campaigning against the opt-out model that the government proposed in the AI and copyright consultation, which came out in December and closed in February. The opt-out model, for those who don't know about it, means that creative works can be used to train generative AI models unless that creative has opted their piece of work out of that. And that comes with a lot of difficulties and issues. One of those being that it's really difficult to opt out all your different pieces of work, especially downstream versions of that work. And also it puts all the onus on creatives instead of the tech companies who are benefiting from this work. We see this at the moment in action. I mean, we could not be having this conversation at a more sort of relevant time, when we're seeing a ping pong between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, with this kind of creative champion of Baroness Biban-Kidron, who is advocating for transparency measures in generative AI training, where we would be able to see all of the training material that these companies are using to train their models, which has been rejected by the Commons, now gone back to the Lords. And as Biban-Kidron's pointed out, we have this kind of incredible copyright law in the UK, but what we can't see, when we can't see what these companies are using, we can't enforce it. And that is so crucial for us to remember, that, you know, the government currently is choosing not to be a world leader in this space, but to kind of cozy up to these big tech companies. So, yeah, the bottom line of what I kind of say is that we need to protect copyright, we need remuneration for creatives whose work have been used, and we need to kind of see fair and dynamic licensing models for these works going forward.
I should say that with the creative industries, I think it was in 2023, it was estimated that they added 126 billion to the UK economy. In the same period, AI added 9 billion. And yet the creative industries are the ones that seem to be getting thrown on the bus. Yeah. So it's a pretty contentious issue. Like you say, it's incredibly timely. Genevieve, you recently co-edited the Routledge Handbook of AI and Literature, and the emphasis you say is on the AI and literature. So can you tell us more about this collection?
Yeah, that was the last time I used Gen AI, was when we were working on this essay collection. And I have to say that was the last time, because the output was just bollocks. Absolute nonsense. I mean, it was all right, but it was, just dreadful. My co-pilot for that was Will Slocum.
An actual human.
An actual human. And, you know, you can argue and they argue back. Working with people, I think, is well, actually, no, I'm going to roll that back. Sometimes they can drive you mad. But I think there's something really sort of co-creative in that tension. Maybe that's something that the evolution of Gen AI will bring us. But at the moment, it's mostly swearing in my house anyway. Obviously I'm biased, but I'm really proud of the collection that we put together. We were commissioned by Routledge to pull together, these are odd beasts, these handbooks. You're supposed to be sort of state-of-the-art, cutting edge, but you also want something that anyone can pick up and engage with. You can set it for reading for students, but you also need to sort of set the future agenda. And I think Routledge really wanted us to do something reasonably pedestrian and focus on AI in literature. They obviously thought that'd be a market for that. And hence, coming to a classicist, we could start, 3,000 years of AI in literature. There's loads of AI in antiquity and ancient myths, in case you haven't heard me bang on about this before. I'm not going to focus on this tonight. But as I say, I am biased, but I'm really proud of the book because we swerved. We thought, other people have done that and done it pretty well. So we really wanted to kind of push the AI and literature button. And we were really helped by the fact that Will and I are not the fastest of writers. We don't use tools. And so we were contracted in 2019, and we thought our deadline of sort of 2021, 22 was a light year away. So of course we didn't start. We chatted to some friends, we had a symposium, but we did bugger all. Sorry, I'm swearing a bit too much, but you're okay. But we really did very little other than just, have nice conversations about things. And then, of course, there was that COVID thing, which really, sort of destroyed my intellectual creativity anyway. And so our deadline kept moving. I don't know how many people in this room, creative or academic, recognize that feeling, the deadline. Excellent, yes, I'm among friends. And as we started getting closer to that deadline, we realized that something really exciting was happening in the world of AI and literature. And we were meeting people who were doing really cool things, both in the academic sphere and in the literary kind of creative sphere. People, I don't know, trying to break the systems, using them not just as tools, but as toys. So one of my favorite chapters in the book is written by a children's author. She's also, Rachel Hampton, she's also really interested in experimenting with, humor. And of course, playing with Gen AI is you've got to have a sense of humor to start with. But, when it screws up, when it gets things wrong, when it's messy, it's comedy gold. So we had people in the volume playing with it as a toy. We had people then theorizing about how the humour works, what's the effect then back on different kinds of readers. I shouldn't have favourite chapters in the book. Pick your favourite child, but obviously I do. And I think that those chapters that are written by creatives and by literary practitioners are certainly amongst my favourite. We have some fantastic work from the poet Victoria Punch, who does a really good, Alexa voice as well when she's writing her poets, and she was engaging ChatGPT to sort of co-write some poetry. All dreadful, that came out just absolutely stinky. But then trying to get it to reflect on the processes. Fascinating piece of work. Find a free copy and have a read if you haven't. But I think one of my standout chapters is by another narratologist, Angus Fletcher, who's based in the States. I know actually some contributors to the volume are in the room tonight, so I am picking my favourite children. I love everyone. But Angus is a real hardline Gen AI skeptic. Just, I think we're going to have a little conversation around this tonight, but very much on the hardline skepticism line. And he drew what for me is a really redolent analogy. You all, I'm sure that the joke about, give, an infinite number of monkeys, an infinite number of typewriters and time, and they will produce. And he was trying to move beyond the stochastic parrot model for thinking about Gen AI. So he looked really deeply into what happens when you give monkeys typewriters. And there was a study at Paignton Zoo in the last 5-10 years. And of course, what happens when you give monkeys in a zoo typewriters is they break them, they smear them with feces, use them as weapons, they just have monkey fun with them. But I just think this is a perfect analogy for thinking about Gen AI in the creative literary sphere. I think at that juncture I should pause. We've had me swearing, we've had monkey shit. So I'm going to hand back to you, Kate.
On that delightful analogy. These, particularly generative AI, these are plausibility generators. These tell you things that you want to hear. And Sarah, we've talked before about generative AI and mimicry. Do you think that AI can rival the very deliberate and careful choices of human experience?
It's such an interesting question, and I think we have to distinguish between meaning which is inferred and meaning which is implied. So we are all at liberty to take meaning from anything, whether it has been created by an accident of nature or a generative AI model or by an artist. And the meaning that is taken from it, no one has any right to say you didn't enjoy that, it didn't make you laugh, you didn't think it was smart. So I don't argue that meaning can be taken from work made by generative AI, but it can't necessarily be fully created by it. So it can be used as a tool. I'm really interested in the use of AI as a kind of device, such as the found poetry that people have been making for many, many years, taking parts of existing work to create something new, using an AI program to produce something that approximates, say, a Robert Rauschenberg work of art, which is a patchwork of other people's work. You wouldn't look at a Rauschenberg and say that it's stolen other people's work. You see something new created from it. But in my experience, work that's purely generative AI, that is pure mimicry, fails. And I'm quite optimistic and sanguine about a threat or not to my livelihood, because I believe in readers. And I think that they're not stupid. And I think that they can tell the difference between parody and mimicry and something that actually has meaning. So, for example, you've probably all seen in the news that a newspaper inadvertently published a roundup of summer reading. And they didn't realise it was all AI. So AI had created a passable imitation of an Isabel Allende novel and a Maggie O'Farrell novel. But all they can do is select from the ether some nouns and some verbs which look like the nouns and verbs that are in a précis of a previous book. But anybody who actually knows about their work would know that it's like a sort of party game spoof. So I suppose what I'm saying is one of the reasons I'm smiling when I talk about literature and AI is because I think readers are really smart. And if the use of AI does anything to the canon of literature, it will just kind of elevate the literature that deserves its audience further.
So that was yesterday that was in the news. The Chicago Sun-Tribune had posted 11 top summer reads, and 10 of them had been completely AI generated because the journalist had asked ChatGPT to write the piece for him.
It's really interesting that if you can ask ChatGPT to write you some Sarah Perry prose.
I was about to ask you about this.
Yeah,
yes,
and you would have to be sort of 6 to think that it was, because all it will do is take, a widow and replace governess, and a serpent for a newt, and a river for a stream. But actually, readers who read know that those are the tropes, those are the images. Books are about what lies underneath. It's about what's encoded in those things. So AI can do a passable job of saying, oh, they've discovered a new George Orwell manuscript. It's set in 1985. But actually, that's not a book about the year 1984 or about big TV screens. It's about a bunch of other stuff. So until AI develops a sense of irony and metaphor, I feel quite untroubled.
This is heartening. And actually, this brings me back to Genevieve, because your chapter in the handbook was about silence in literature. So how does AI parse or predict the unwritten?
It really doesn't. I'm always looking out for things that computers don't do as well as humans, and things are developing and transforming, as indeed transformer architectures are letting us do cleverer and cleverer things with those AI tools. But it's rubbish at, see, I didn't swear then, is absolutely rubbish at passing silence. And it's because, well, there's many reasons because, but I just find it was terribly poor. And Sarah, you were saying it's the silences, it's the unsaid, it's the disnarrated and undernarrated that is so important in literature. And AI sort of doesn't get that. It wants to fill silences, fill gaps with something. We talk, stochastic parrots and like weaponized autofill technologies don't like silences. And in text and poetry and in literature, that's such a powerful, the spaces around between are just as important as the, what is there. And it's terrible at it. And it was really fascinating looking at different examples. And I think in AI research, there is a recognition that silence is under-researched in that sphere. So I'm saying at the moment it is terrible, because if we come back and have this conversation in, 18 months' time, I suspect it's going to be getting better. But unless it's been trained on some natural language discourse where there was a pause as I hesitated for thought, and I ummed and ahed, and so I'm too self-conscious about it now, but trained on it will try and fill a silence and a gap with, a pause for thought to make you think it's sentient, with an and an ah. But I also think when I was doing the research for that piece, there is so much in literature and literary criticism that we can do, in a sense, to annotate silence, to try and, expose its dynamics, and its narrative dynamics, its literary kind of poetic dynamics. I'm a little bit afraid that then Gen AI sort of just hoovers all that up and then, actually learns to work with silence. But it's really interesting at the moment that that's an area of significant weakness, and something that writers and poets absolutely,
And it's also a problem-solving device, right? AI sees a problem. You don't have this piece of writing. I will solve it by creating some writing for you. And actually, really good writing contains mistakes. So, one of the greatest openings in literature is the opening of A Christmas Carol, and it goes, Marley was dead, : to begin with. I mean, it's a work of absolute genius. And it's because the colon is kind of technically almost grammatically incorrect. The irony of saying Marley was dead to begin with, you immediately think, I thought I was reading Dickens, but now we've got a ghost. All of these kind of surprises are that's what makes art work, because it contains a mistake that you allow rather than just a problem to be solved by a kind of patch of data.
I like that. And actually, coming back, I want to stick on this idea of what's not written, because one of the things, and Clem, I'm going to ask you specifically about a particular area. One of the things about large language models is they're predominantly English language based, so that the works we are getting, we are losing information, we are losing voices that they're not being trained on. So you spoke to translators as part of it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
That's one industry that you think is just going to be ripe for taking over.
Oh, absolutely. And actually that was one of the focus groups that I did was with literary translators online. And I was saying earlier, it was very late at night because they were all around the world. So it was this kind of incredible bubble that I emerged from afterwards, full of thoughts. But yeah, I think that they are very aware, translators, that everyone thinks that they are at risk. And actually, what I don't think I realized about translators is how precarious it already is for them. They are unagented. They go from contract to contract. At the moment, a big effect that they're seeing on their income is that they usually translate samples for publishers before they translate the full work. And what publishers are doing to save money is using something like DeepL, which is an AI-powered translation tool, to translate the sample first. They don't pay the translator, and then they'll decide whether they want to commission the book. So that's one very kind of concrete impact that translators are seeing. But on the flip side, there are translators who are using AI models quite frequently to look at particular words or sentence structures. And I think that they are relatively open to the use of it in their work, but they are also very aware that it could impact their entire livelihood. And really, they see that translation, which it is, as a kind of creative act. a kind of rewriting of the book. You know, you select a word that you think reflects the word that author has intended, and that's your choice. You know, that's why translators should be kind of recognized more than they currently are as writers of the book. So I think that's a really interesting case study. I also just want to pick up on something that Sarah was saying, which is that there's a Curtis Sittenfeld, who's a novelist, wrote a piece in the New York Times a few weeks ago where she writes a piece and then she gets generative AI to write a piece. You don't know who's written which, and then you come to the end and it's revealed. And I genuinely didn't know which was which. So I think that's quite an interesting thing. And I think a part of the research that I feel is really missing is research on consumers, on readers, because we don't actually know. You say, like, you trust readers, and I love that. But I also do think that a lot of the market is controlled by people who pick up a book at Waterstones in Heathrow on the way to their holiday. Yeah. And I don't think we know which direction the market's going to go. And so that research on consumers, I think, will be really crucial to see where this goes.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting here, which everyone is very tentative to talk about, apart from me, because I don't mind winding people up. There's good art and there's bad art, right? There has always been good art and bad art. We tend to fetishize, for example, the Victorian novel, because I can talk about Dickens and we'll all agree that it's very fine work.
No.
But the market was flooded with penny dreadfuls, which nobody reads anymore because they were terrible. And I suppose part of me thinks that if there is a form of literature currently in circulation which can be adequately mimicked by AI, then it has made itself obsolete. In the same way that hand-printed or screen-printed wallpaper is now obsolete because you can print it out. But there will always be forms of work that have to be made by artists. And I just feel quite sort of relaxed about the idea that the modern version of the penny dreadful can be created by machine, because in every sphere of art and craft, developments in technology have kind of rendered the workaday, the penny dreadful of everything, kind of valueless. And that's all right. Value is set by whether it can be made by one person or 5 million.
So someone's going to want that hand-printed wallpaper. Do you think there's going to be a market?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do.
Writers to write bespoke pieces.
Yeah, completely. As we speak, there are people walking into bookshops buying Emma McBride's experimental fiction. There are not fewer of them because of AI. The people that are reading good literature are always going to read good literature. The people, like me included, who want a nice crime beach read, might be kind of less discerning in that moment. But the market for the fine work, I don't think, will be altered because it can't be replicated.
So will we have a craft beer scenario where we have microbreweries and micro novelists and all this? I don't know what the term would be, but I mean, this is.
And there'll always be people who are more or less discerning, and that's also fine. So I say I trust readers. There was a thing recently where there was a quiz of whether you could tell whether extracts of poetry were actually written by Spenser, Shakespeare, Dylan Thomas. Of course, I could tell all of them. You would expect me to. And kind of discerning and sensible and intelligent reader would. People who don't read much poetry couldn't tell. Well, they shouldn't be able to. That's all right.
You know, my
so if there's work being created that is indistinguishable, well, if it was better, then it would be. so I make myself very unpopular by then saying the sort of thing. I'm very sorry.
This because it's absolutely fuel for an argument. And
I have a lot to say.
Yeah, I knew there would be. And as someone, I'm still haunted by Dickens at A level, so I'm. Do you want to come back to that, Chloe?
Yeah, no. I'll just try and be really quick and concise. I think it's so interesting, Sarah. I think it's all really about taste, isn't it? Because maybe to you, something that isn't good to someone else is amazing fiction. And I do think as well, we were talking a little bit earlier about the distinction between kind of literary writing and genre writing, which is another big thing to be considered here, is that maybe certain types of I'm a romance novelist, and maybe certain types of writing like romance, like crime, are you're a bit more able to mimic them using a generative AI model than you might be with literary fiction, like you write, Sarah. But I also think that time will tell, because we don't know how sophisticated these models will become around creative writing. And another really interesting piece in the papers the other week was in The Guardian, where an OpenAI creative writing model wrote a piece about grief. I don't know if anyone read it, but it was genuinely, it was quite moving. I mean, it was written from the perspective of the AI. So it realized it couldn't understand grief. But I do think it was sort of more sophisticated than I had anticipated it to be. And I think that there's this gap here of knowledge. We don't know how sophisticated they'll be. Yeah.
The gap in knowledge, though, I think also comes back to the reader, back to the human. I think we're just beginning to realise how easy we are, how manipulable we are through words and through images. I think that there are a number of researchers for whom this is not news, but I think at an individual level, I think it keeps surprising me what an easy mark I am, frankly, for this kind of stuff.
I think there's something else that is worth raising, is what is the nature of the threat? So say generative AI becomes so sophisticated that it can make like a really great Tana French, who's like one of our greatest crime novelists, that it can kind of like replicate that or replicate any work. So the only reason that matters is if it's taking a livelihood away from a writer, right? So because it's not a zero-sum game in the market. You don't not buy a crime novel because you've already read one. If anything, you're going to buy another one because you enjoyed the one you just read. So if we can identify the nature of the threat, and it's generally speaking couched in terms of taking work away from people whose work trained the model, right? But then we get down to the idea of what's the purpose of art in the first place. So in saying the main threat of generative AI is to the salaries of the writers, we have just said that the purpose of art is to earn money, in which case it's utilitarian and it's not art. So if you disambiguate the two and you say, art for art's sake, it's for the sake of the enlargement of the soul, it's for the sake of, empathy and beauty and all of the rest of it, then who cares if it gets perfectly imitated because no one's worrying about the money. So I think there's an extent to which writers are trying to play both ends against the middle. On the one hand, they're saying, my precious art mustn't be replicated. But on the other hand, the only reason there's a real threat is because they're worried their income's going to go down, in which case it's not art, in a way. And nobody earns, very few people earn a decent living from writing anyway. The average wage of a novelist is £7,000 a year. It might go down to 6,500 because they lost a few sales because an AI program published something a bit like their book. But I think we have to think really carefully about the nature of the threat. And if it's purely fiscal, then we're not talking about a threat to art, we're talking about something else.
And it's quite shocking just how few copies of books sell as well. I think people don't really realise, academics realise, because you sell maybe one.
The average sales of a literary novel in hardback is 400 copies a year.
Yeah. And so, if an AI going to produce something comparable? Yeah. There are the big bestseller ones, but it's really hard, right? To make a living. It's difficult. But I want to press you a little bit. Actually, I know where you're going to go with this, and I want to hear it more. So yes, there's not a threat to livelihood, but I know that you are very thoughtful about ethical issues around this. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? One thing I find frustrating is that in the conversations that I've had with my fellow novelists, all of whom think of themselves as being very good people, because everybody does, they're more concerned with their own livelihood and the threat to their art than they are about the ethical side of things, although it was really heartening to hear that you hear more of... You obviously know nicer people than I do. The thing that keeps me awake at night is not the possibility that somebody is going to buy a mimicry of like stripped Baptist Gothic fiction, as if anyone's bothering with that particular niche except for me. But the fact that the texts that are fed into these large language models are not being fed by bots. They're being fed by human souls who spend all day crammed into these tiny rooms on poverty pay, sifting through the most abysmal content to redact violence and to redact sexually explicit and ghastly images and language to an extent that it's incredibly damaging to their psyches. There was a huge report recently from people in Kenya
who are data inputters, whose job is to see what you are protected from. So they are made to see and manually remove things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life, and they're doing it for poverty wages. So this is not purely, it's not a question of sort of a bot doing it. It's human beings whose mental health is being sacrificed to the bottom line of these companies. And then, of course, there's the environmental impact of these massive supercomputers sucking up water. And, oh no, I might lose some sales. But, there are people losing their minds. And I would like to see the arts community put its money where its mouth is, and to talk more about that, and not so much about, the possibility of their work being copyright theft, which is what I mostly see. I sort of go on social media, it's hundreds of novelists all signing some open letter. None of them seem to know anything about the people whose backs are being broken by this work.
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, and also the environmental impact of these models as well. Of course, yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add quickly.
Which only become even more extractive and environmentally degrading. When rare earth minerals aside, but just the water consumption, which is only increasing as the networks get, and exactly. And the latest stat. So one of the reasons I stopped using Gen AI and playing with it, unless I really need to do something for work, is because of we had an event at Cheltenham, and someone from Microsoft released, amongst the group, some early research that they'd been doing, and it's gone up ever since. But she was saying it's a pint of water for this report that we've written, and the latest stats I saw in preparation for this evening.
The MIT report.
Yeah, the MIT report. What is it? Half a litre for 100 words. Yeah. I mean, it's obscene.
And it's so hard to pin down exact figures, so you will hear wide variations. But essentially, when you take into account the data, the energy used for storage, that's why they're buying nuclear power plants to run these things. The amount of water needed to cool the data centers. It definitely adds up. I think we are seeing this point where maybe this is something we have to make a decision on, in the same way that we may choose not to consume fast fashion, or the way that we choose to limit flights. But do you think that's gaining traction? Are people...
Yes, I was sorry. So I was saying to Sarah earlier, we were having this discussion, and I said that in the focus groups, I do see people grappling with this more, particularly people who use it. I think it's incredible how, as humans, we can justify the things that we do. But I do think that I do see it coming out in these conversations where people will say, I do use it. I am aware that it's pirated, it's built on all this pirated data, some of it being my own, and I can't quite square that yet. But, it's this sort of process that people are going through.
Can I ask, why are they using it? This is what why are they using it? I just don't understand, unless it's, sorry, this sounds entirely tangential, but you have people who consider themselves artists, intellectuals, writers, creatives, and who know that it's immoral and damaging to their fellow humans and to the environment, but they do it anyway. Why?
I think there's a really simple answer to that, actually. And I think it is because it saves them time and money. That's really specifically for the publishing industry. Yeah. For writers, similarly, it saves them time. A lot of writers are doing it alongside full-time jobs. They're waking up really early or staying up really late to write. And actually, if they can use a system which will help them to create a structure or a plot line or something they're stuck on, then they'll do it, because it saves them maybe a day.
And I think that goes right back to the thing I was saying earlier. If your work is a job, you are just making money, you are creating a product to be sold in the marketplace as fast and as efficient as possible, then you have just made yourself like every other craft that has been rendered lower value or obsolete by technology. And I think that you have just shaken hands with the devil. You are literally, by the use of AI, you have just said my work has no use, because it can be done by, and therefore the whole thing just kind of eats itself, right?
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, do you think there's anything to be said for people who want to express something but find it difficult, but who are able to do that through this tool? Do you think there's a kind of compelling reason for them to use that?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, sorry, I just have a couple of things I wanted to say. One was going back to what you were saying, Sarah, about this this kind of financial drive. And I think that a really big thing I've been seeing in the work that I'm doing is that one of the main things coming up is trust and connection as a theme. And really what a lot of authors are worried about is that trust disintegrating between themselves and the reader. The reader maybe not knowing how much of it this writer has produced, that connection with their readers maybe then being broken, and also this distinction between process and output. So how much do we value the process of writing and that kind of insanity that comes with it, and things like boredom? Like one of my participants said, like, what about kids? They're not going to be bored anymore. So how are they going to create? You know, how are they going to imagine? And I think it's such an interesting distinction. But going back to your question, Kate, the second part, I really do think that there is a case to be made for that. One of my participants was, you know, she spoke about how she was very dyslexic and has always had a lot of trouble with putting her work out there because she's really worried about the spelling mistakes and the grammar errors and the use of her words being in the wrong place and things like this. And obviously that's messy and that's wonderful and that's hers. But at the same time, it sort of unlocks it sort of unlocks that ability for her to put her work out there and say, actually, I feel really comfortable, even if I choose to keep this in here where it's not meant to be, with the grammar telling me that it's not meant to be there, grammar checker, or the spell checker telling me this is wrong. Actually, it kind of unlocks that ability for her expression to be out there. So yeah, I would say that.
I want to move to some questions in a moment. In fact, that kind of the top rated question on Slido so far relates to this, which is noting the limited diversity in literature, I think in the world of literature, I'm guessing. Do you think AI could give non-British writers more access through support with things like language and industry insight? Could it be a useful thing?
I think if it weren't for the hideously damaging environmental and kind of ethical issues tending this, it has the ability, it already is proving to be a game changer for so many people. So sort of levelling the playing field in some context. And if it weren't so damaging, this is a ridiculous counterfactual, but it almost has the potential to be almost like, I'm old, and so I remember when they wouldn't let us use calculators in school, and so there's a sense in which a bit of me thinks, could it be like the calculator for writing and for literature? And that would be awesome. But, you know, my little, you know, Casio Scientific was not, you know, exploiting, you know, rare resources and individuals. So,
but the teacher used to say, you'll never walk around with a calculator in your hand all the time. Who's laughing now? So, yeah. Do we think the AI threat is only to employment? What about the risk of propagating misinformation like false history and values? And we know that ChatGPT is essentially a bullshit machine, so you know the chances are high. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but it's so contrarian. Non-AI generated history books are often bullshit as well.
Yeah, but not less. Well, yes, yes.
And like who can tell? You know, you can read 6 books about, you know, the latter year of the Great War, and all of them have a different explanation for why it all went on so long.
Yes, but
because
of
the interpretation of fact and who gathered fact from where and
but
who
often
said
they'll
what.
get the facts though. They'll often be sharing the same facts from different perspectives.
But what are facts? Who gathered the data? Was it the victor or the loser? You know.
See your point.
So I sound really contrarian, but I think that it's kind of, it's more of the same things that have always been happening to art and literature. It's just like another lens in like obsolescence and in change and in deceit and in misinformation. You know, boomers falling for, you know, those awful AI-generated images of tattooed grannies that one of my friends keeps sending me, and she's younger than I am, and she thinks they're really cool old people and they're AI-generated. You know, there was a time when people showed a film in a cinema and everybody ran out screaming because they couldn't tell that the train crash on the screen wasn't real. So we've always had to deal with these ideas of what's real and what isn't. And for us, it's AI. But there was a time it was the Cottingley fairies in the photographs. I don't know that it's that different particularly.
I think misrepresenting history in a historical novel is different to producing work that is trained on like neo-Nazi
No,
Reddit
I don't
thread.
mean in historical fiction, I mean actual history texts. They are very, very different. There's no view from nowhere. Even a history book, a factual history book, is written by a person from somewhere with a set of politics and some kind of agenda. And of course, that's very different from someone deliberately spreading misinformation. But a German historian publishing a book on the First World War in 1926 is not going to be writing the same book on the history of the World War as a Polish writer writing in 1965. They just aren't. And you know, what do we mean by deliberate misinformation? You can say, oh, deliberate misinformation spread by someone with a Nazi agenda. Well, they have an agenda and they're spreading it, and it's pernicious and terrible, but that's the way it always kind of was.
So I've got some more questions. These are great. People keep voting up the questions, which is really good. So could you talk about the economics of AI manufactured literature, specifically regarding social media and Amazon, where selection is also done algorithmically? Do you think is there an extra thing, I'm guessing, about that? If anyone wants to clarify that question and what they were speaking about, please jump in. But
some of the research we've been doing and some of the contributions to the handbook describe this as the voice of the platform. So we used to literature having, you know, the authorial voice, the reader's voice in the kind of meaning making that goes into that interaction. But the platforms also clearly have a voice. Those algorithmic decisions, the nudges, you know, that you read this, you might like to do that. So constraining the choice, really sort of limiting what you're exposed to, in a sense, and factoring that is significant. But also authors, human flesh and blood authors, sort of stirring up debates on other platforms and in a sense to identify their profile in a particular way. So when we talk about Gen AI as a literary tool or toy or as kind of ghostwriting, but there are so many other AI affordances shaping the world of literature, and there's so much to be cognizant of at any one time. I think it is quickly overwhelming.
Yeah, so platforms are also playing a part in this, I think. Was anyone want to ask a question in the room? We have some microphones if anybody wants to do that, or you can keep going with the Slido things. Yep, question at the back. We got a microphone somewhere for someone. Yeah, someone coming up to you now.
We have a question here. Have you considered the benefits to writers with physical disabilities to whom AI tools have made writing independently physically possible?
Yeah, this is such an interesting thing. I have a family member who has cerebral palsy and communicates with eye gaze software, which is not quite the same thing as generative AI, but there's kind of an overlap between forms of software that help people who have various levels of ability and communication to express themselves. And there's actually a book written by a young man entirely through eye gaze software. And it's really interesting seeing the kind of prose that arises when a writer or an artist of any kind uses some form of like technological intervention to overcome the barriers to writing. And one of the things that I think is really exciting is the point where generative AI meets intention and meets something about the individual to create something new and distinct, which is so different from the mimicry that we're talking about. And it makes me think of this amazing poem called Monet Refuses the Operation, and it's about how Monet went blind but carried on painting through his blindness because he refused to see it as a form of disability, but rather something that would create a new type of work. And I do think it's really important for people like me who are quite kind of brutal about the use of AI to also see that when it is used deliberatively as an intervention in someone's personhood, whether that's physical or mental changes, it can create something that's really distinctive. And it's really worth seeking out some of the work that's written by people using eye gaze software, because the way that you select words is very, very different from writing like letter after letter, and it creates like a really interesting prose style.
Genevieve,
No, I can't follow that. That was brilliant, and I want to go and see if I can, play with this as well.
Yes.
So that was, yeah.
Anybody else in the room? This one right here. We can get your microphone.
Is it microphone?
One here. She's coming down now with the microphone. Oh, we've got 2 microphones where we are.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, have you assessed readers? Because I've heard a lot about readers not wanting authors to use AI. So there's sorry. So there were instances where authors have used AI for the covers of the books, and other people saying stuff like they can tell it's AI because it's got M dashes inside the text. But they're like, you can't really tell what's real or not fake. But the readers are saying that they don't want AI, authored books.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
It's a great question. I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about it would be so interesting to think about the readership. And I do think that I've had a few authors say to me, I'm genuinely worried about my reputation if people think I've written using AI and I haven't. And things like, M dashes, certain words as well coming up. Delve, multifaceted, tapestry. Look out for it. It's a thing. Genuinely, multifaceted comes up all the time. I ask them at the end, my focus group participants, to do an exercise. They can use AI. They don't have to write a bit of fiction. Most of them use it fully, write the whole thing. And multifaceted genuinely comes up in every single one. So it's amazing. But yeah, so I do think there is a worry for authors that they're going to be labelled as using AI, maybe when they're not, maybe when they use it a little bit. And I think that they're also worried about that. Kind of also goes back to that connection between authors and readers. They're worried they're going to lose that connection with their readership. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating question. I think there needs to be more work into that, how readers feel, especially around certain writers.
I think that's partly what I meant by trusting readers. So it's not necessarily believing that every reader has this innate capacity to distinguish between AI-generated prose or human-generated prose, but that readers don't want to read work by robots. The connection between a reader and a writer is really precious. And I'm fortunate enough to meet lots of my readers, and it's like virtually a parasocial love, right? And people get so invested in writers like Jodi Picoult or Tana French, or the worship that was for Hilary Mantel. And I think we really underestimate. This is why I keep going back to this thing where if you use AI as an artist because you are just creating product for money, that's absolutely fine, but you have opted out of that reader-writer relationship. You've broken that trust, and therefore that's not going to be sustained. And I really do believe that that's what readers want. They don't necessarily want a product like selecting a T-shirt. They want something from you, from the writer, from that consciousness. I might be being really optimistic. We'll find out in the next few years.
I think you're being a bit optimistic, Sarah, if I might say. We've been on too harmonious. We disagree. I think alongside artificial intelligence, we always have to factor in human stupidity. I'm talking for myself here. How many people in the room are academics, students, teachers of some kind? Okay, excellent. So I am losing my ability to tell whether a student essay has been ChatGPT'd or whether it's entirely, a student-led piece of work. And I don't know if that chimes with any of you here. I'm not.
I was going to actually bring that up, but I'm glad you did, because people are starting, is it going to modify how we behave? Do we start erasing the word multifaceted from our vocabularies? Or down?
I think we should.
Because maybe we do that as a conscious choice and we change our own language and it shapes us because we don't want to be mistaken for the AI. But also we know that there is already, there are already recorded episodes of people not thinking that a student has used AI, but it's not. It's their language style.
Exactly.
And they may not be, they may not have English as a first language, and so their way of writing may be slightly different and is seen as being some kind of AI aberration rather than being their own voice. And I think that's a really dangerous path to tread. And it's one of the reasons why I'm actually, and this is why there's a question on this, which is how do you think academics and professors will or should adapt to students using AI? And I think King's has particularly has wrestled with this and has got it down to being sort of 3 categories. You can go forth, use AI, embrace it, tell us what you did, that's great. Or there's the, yeah, you can use it, but use it for the kind of the checking and the drafting. Or there's the do not touch. And people can apply, professors, lecturers can apply the version they think is appropriate for what they're assessing. And I have set assignments where I say, please don't use AI specifically for this because it's a critique of AI and I don't want you to get the AI to critique itself because it will do it really badly. If you try and get AI to critique itself and talk about terrible environmental damage, it doesn't really give you a satisfying answer. So I just wonder, I think we cannot and should not be turning around and accusing students of using AI because we don't have a way of accurately detecting it. We have to just judge on the content. And if we're assessing someone on their ability to answer an essay in the form of writing something that ChatGPT could do, then we're assessing the wrong thing. And we have to rethink how we assess.
I think there's also like a broader kind of philosophical question behind why students would be using AI to complete a piece of work in the first place. And I think that this may have something to do with the commodification of education. So if we have entered into an education philosophy in which a degree is a product which you purchase and you secure as quickly as possible, you have removed from the idea of education, in that kind of contract between the student and the teacher, the process of mistake, the process of learning, the process of grappling with something, creating something sort of odd that you might not get a very good mark for, but it's moving you towards something. And I think it's really interesting to see that students would want to use generative AI. And maybe it's because they have this sense that they have paid their tuition fee and they would like to get their product at the end of it with a minimum amount of effort. And that says something about how we view education, I think.
And I think that's kind of the kind of extreme end of it. I think there's much more prosaic and practical ideas that people are under pressure and they've got a lot of demands and they need to get something done, and it's a quick way of doing things. But yeah, I completely the way that we need to think about how we certainly need in this country right now to think about what's happening in higher education, because oh boy.
That's another seminar. Yeah.
There's a question on here, and I've been looking at it thinking I really want to ask that, and it's. Someone said, I'm curious about the idea that some mistakes make art great. Google's AI said it's good to eat rocks. Could hallucinations be considered to have artistic value?
Ooh, that's really good.
Did you say hallucinations?
Hallucinations, the confabulations of the model.
Obviously.
Yeah. I know, I think it's joyful. That's the best bit. I would agree. I think it's the best bit.
And I think, let's think about some really great work. Okay, so it was just been the anniversary of the publication of Mrs. Dalloway, right? And it contains this extraordinary phrase, which is basically ludicrous. So she hears the chiming of Big Ben, and she says they dissolve like leaden circles in the air, which is actually doesn't function properly as a metaphor because lead doesn't dissolve and it certainly doesn't float. But if you hear the phrase dissolve like leaden circles in the air, you can all kind of imagine the tolling of the bell kind of rippling out from Westminster. And so when I say that mistakes are the kinds of things that make great art, it's the strange and the hallucinatory. And there may come a time, my optimism and my sanguinity may prove to be, catastrophically misplaced. But that's the kind of thing that I haven't really seen, that working towards, that working through. And I'm really struck by a panel I saw recently where David Simon, who wrote The Wire, the great TV series The Wire, he was interviewed about AI, and by kind of like a tech bro person who's used to seeing output as being a unit of consumption, right? That you trade for money for your bottom line. And all he could see creative processes as being is like solving a problem. You've got to make this thing and you solve a problem. And he said to David Simon, would you ever use ChatGPT? You're halfway through a scene, you don't know how to conclude it, and you can ask generative AI to give you like 3 options for concluding the scene, and then you can choose the one that works best. And David Simon just leant forward and said, I would rather stick a gun in my mouth. And the guy interviewing him couldn't understand because all he could see was, but you'll get a solution quicker. And all David Simon was seeing was that actually the point is that you're not arriving at a solution quickly. There is no solution. It's not a mathematical equation. It's a strange, transformative, weird piece of art. And you might be right. If AI can do that, then I'm going to go and train as a shoemaker in Northampton.
I was going to ask you the question again, just because Does it mean, and then like hallucinations, did anyone in here ask that? Hallucinations in terms of...
Could they have artistic value?
They have artistic value.
Hallucinations in their own right, is that
yeah.
the hallucination?
Well, I think it's really such a good question, because another thing that comes up a lot in my work is that when people use it and then they go to the link and they click through and the citation doesn't exist and it's just made up, this random fact or thing. And I really think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about, I often think about this in the context of historical novels, for example, where if you're using ChatGPT maybe to write a section of a historical novel and it hallucinates, I don't know, I'm not quite decided on whether that could be cool or not. It depends on the context, but I guess you are sort of maybe creating something that wasn't there before, something that didn't happen. Maybe that's creative. But then also something that I haven't touched on yet, which we won't have time for, is that creativity, or is creativity that's something that's solely human? And is that something else? Is it a riff? Is it a kind of restructuring instead of creativity, which to me is quite human as a concept?
And we have the field of computational creativity has been around a really long time, and there have been so many debates about this and the different forms that creativity can take. Can we have computers that are creative in themselves? Can we have computers that give us tools so they can enhance our creativity? Can we understand the human mind better through the use of those computers? And then what forms of creativity does that take? Is it combinatorial, where it combines things like a recipe and comes up with something new, or does it shift boundaries, or is it truly transformational? And I think these are all, questions. There's a whole discussion session in its own right. But I kind of want to come to this one, which is generative AI could level the field, but if those voices are channeled through an AI, might it become homogenized to the point where all the uniqueness is lost? I think
yes.
And especially because access to equity in the publishing world in particular is a very complicated thing. And one of the things that makes it so complicated is that people who are acquiring novels expect certain things from certain demographics, right? So they would expect a white working class man to write about a housing estate in which somebody is a single mother with a substance abuse problem who is struggling to bring up her 3 children. And if somebody has, is of Sri Lankan heritage, the novel will be published with a fucking jacaranda tree on the cover, right? So you are allowed to, sorry, I swore like Genevieve. So you are allowed to be from diverse backgrounds if you speak into the idea of what the white publishing industry expects someone from a diverse background to write. So my worry about thinking that generative AI can open gates to people is that all it's going to do is expect them to do more of the same of what the white writers that were trained on. So actually what we want is for, a working class person of, black British heritage to be writing historical fiction set in an abbey on the Isle of Ely in 1655, because people from every background should be able to write every kind of literature. And saying generative AI can break down barriers, you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house.
In terms of this homogenization, I mean, are we going to see eventually, we run the risk of model collapse, where the AI large language models ingest more information and data from online, but that information and data is already generated itself. So we have a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Are we all doomed? Are we going to collapse? Is it going to run out of data? I mean, is that our chance to wrest back control?
I don't. I mean, yes, that is already happening, and is certainly going to accelerate. But I know I'm a huge fan of murder mysteries. I love a Christie and an Allingham, but my God, you get photocopies of photocopies, as you go through them, and I still read them and I still enjoy them. I think we shouldn't necessarily have different expectations for the stuff that will be churned out. And this is just reaffirming. I'm agreeing with you now. Sorry. Now that you've sworn like a Genevieve, absolutely, we will see there will be crap coming out of him. There's crap in the literary world, and that's even probably the wrong word in this context. But yes, it is going to get messy.
And it's all a matter of taste. And I still won't read any Dickens. So guess that. We're going to have to wrap it up there. And I want to ask, just before we finish, I'm going to ask to each of the panelists, what are your hopes for AI in this field? And you can have any hope that you like. Clemmie, do you want to start?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Well, I I guess that my hope, I'm going to try and just be to the point here, is that the government wakes up and starts regulating copyright and licensing better. That is my hope.
That's a good hope.
I hope that the hype cycle on this, the hamster wheel of hype here runs fast, and we get to a more kind of stable piece of equilibrium, and the ethical considerations are sorted swiftly.
Yeah, I hope that that it falls out of favour because people's conscience means more to them than their salary, frankly. Nice. Oh, I'm so sanctimonious. I'm really sorry, but I genuinely do hope that it would be a bit embarrassing in 10 years' time. It's just a bit embarrassing.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank our speakers for sharing their thoughts and their expertise. And this has been a really lovely way to kick off our Digital Future series. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could just ask the non-AI Sarah to advance this slide, because I have to say to take a moment to scan the QR code if you wish and answer one question to help with the evaluation of the festival. This is a reminder that the festival runs until Saturday the 24th of May, so this Saturday, and there are lots of other events in the programme. And you can find out more and register with the other QR code that's up there, or find someone in a festival t-shirt and they can help you as well if you want to know more. And finally, thank you, the audience, for coming to King's today. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. So thanks very much.